Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is the 73rd episode of our series on anticipating and awaiting the coming of Moshiach. And why we want it now is kind of a reframing. There'll be some old themes revisited, but very much of a reframing of how Jewish people have typically looked towards or spoken about Mashiach. You know, like the Rebbe encouraged us to yearn and to demand and to hope and pray for Mashiach. And he encouraged the singing of, we want Mashiach now. So why do we want Mashiach now? Why? What's the issue? Typically, and I say this a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but typically, the average Torah Jew, person who believes that Torah is from God, Yiddishkeit, religion is about a relationship with the Creator, and ultimately they know that Mashiach is a foundational principle in Torah, and that the world is going to be the gorgeous, godly garden it was always intended to be. But typically, people start talking about Mashiach when things are bad. And they'll say, oy vey, a tragedy happened. Oy, Mashiach now. I was at a shiva last year. There was a very, very tragic loss. And I was like watching people come in and they say, Mashiach now. And I thought to myself, like, yeah, of course Hashem should comfort that. Tragedy shouldn't happen. Is that what needs to happen for us to yearn for Mashiach? And they actually wish bad things, like or uncomfortable things, or to feel the squeeze of Galut, of exilic dispersion. Is that what's needed for us to yearn for Mashiach? And that would be like a terrible thing, because that means we have to wait for it to get bad, so people will yearn for it to get good. My dear friends, that's so wrong-headed. It's just so off. Now, very early on in this series, we talked about what is the essence of Mashiach, and we kind of developed this idea, this thesis of something called Shleimut HaTorah v'HaMitzvah. And I'm going to encourage you to go back and watch some of those earlier episodes, where after we define the man, the moment, why do we want Mashiach? What is Mashiach? What does the age represent? And the idea that we developed over time, over a number of episodes, was how we're not yearning for an end to suffering and persecution and problems, and Mashiach is not the panacea for all the things that have gone wrong in our world, although all those things will be righted once Mashiach comes. But Mashiach's about perfection in Torah mitzvahs. You say, okay, very nice, but we're like regular people, regular human beings. So how do you expect a regular human being to yearn for, let's say, perfection in Torah and mitzvahs? I mean, the average person, he's not even excited to do a mitzvah, per se. I mean, could be realistic. If you come to people and say, the hockey game goes into overtime. I don't know, I'm just here in Canada, but I know if the hockey game goes into overtime, all the fans are cheering. And if the Torah class goes into overtime, everybody's yawning. So what does it mean? It's going to be shleimus haTorah v'mitzvahs. Does anybody even care about that? And are we setting ourselves up for failure? Like, how does this whole thing work? So, of course, a big part of this is taking the time to educate yourself and learn about Mashiach. And that's why the Rebbe talked about the importance of what we're doing right now, again and again and again. We're not going to be able to yearn for Mashiach properly. And the yearning is a key element in accelerating the process and bringing Mashiach, as we also documented in many of the earlier episodes. So this is a really important part of it all. But this is what we're going to learn today. Episode 73 is a radical reorientation. And similar to the previous episode, it's like not about suffering and tragedy in detail, but the previous episode was very high-minded. It was almost like you start to worry about the Creator's concerns. And it addressed the fears, the issues that certain people had with, we're going to call it, the obsessive, focus on Mashiach? Why do you have to talk about Mashiach? Okay, Mashiach will come. Mashiach will come and say, hello. Like, would you look at these sources and see that Hashem himself says he's suffering? So if you claim to be a pious person and a religiously minded person and a spiritually oriented person, how do you not care about that? But this episode is going to be very much grounded because we're going to talk about you and me, regular people, okay? And we're going to talk about how our yearning for Mashiach should have nothing to do with whatever ominous projections people might have about the world we live in or the society in which we have to function, and whether things are getting bad and there's stormy clouds that are gathering above us. That's not what Mashiach's about, my friends. It really isn't, and that's not what should make us yearn for Mashiach. Okay, so listen to this. This is Shabbos Parshas Bo, Tashum Mem Gimel. It's early in 1983, and in the middle of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe starts talking about this idea, and I'm going to synopsize a lot of things because really, this could take us through a lot of. If we went through all the sources, it could take a lot of time. So I'm going to introduce a few key sources and a few key phrases and elements, but I'm going to keep it. I'm trying to move it along. So the Rebbe introduced this idea. He said it's known that, generally speaking, when we discuss or reference the reason or the purpose, if you will, for Galut. So Galut is seen and depicted as a preparation for the coming of Mashiach. We're like in the training stages. So the challenges that we have to endure are refining us and perfecting us and making us ready to be able to merit and absorb the magical and magnificent moments of Mashiach. Now, the Rebbe talked about a mimer from the Alter Rebbe, a very famous Hasidic discourse that's found in Torah or in the beginning of Parshat Shemot, where he speaks about the Egyptian exile, the terrible suffering, and the pain and the tragedy of our Jewish existence before we were even a nation. It's the family of Hebrews, how they were tormented, how they were tortured, how they were broken, murdering babies, beating people to death. Horrible stuff, really. Horrible, terrible, terrible realities. It's for decades. Not just like the really, really harsh, horrible times went on for almost 80 years. Because like when Moses was born, babies were being thrown into the river. We're talking about millions of babies murdered. Moses was supposed to be thrown in the river. Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't come back as the Redeemer until he's 80 years old. That means we're talking Warsaw Ghetto for 80 years. I mean, how did they even survive? It's like, how were there even a Jewish people left, and let alone an enormous population explosion? But this is what happened, and it says there was Bechaymer or Belevenim with these unbelievably backbreaking quotas of work that were placed upon the people, and that they built these enormous storage cities that sank into the ground. Enormous, it says enormous storage facilities. We're talking about over a century of work, maybe even a century and a half. And they all sank into the ground. By the way, you probably followed the news that they discovered that the pyramids are just a little capital on top of an enormous structure that's beneath the ground. And everybody's like, what is the structure? And all they're able to tell us that there are very, very large areas, like enormous spaces beneath the ground. I'm thinking, like, this is like exactly what we were being told about, but couldn't fathom. This is exactly what the Medrash says, exactly what the Gemara says. This is the piece on Maram says. It all sank into the ground. So the Alter Rebbe says there that the avodas perech, that the crushing labor, which refined the people and enabled them to emerge later as an Am Yisrael that could receive the Torah and become Hashem's special children. And that these ideas presage the reality of our Galut today, and that we can achieve this not by the harsh, crushing suffering, but rather by toil and Torah. So the word bechomer, which means mortar, bricks and mortar, becomes a euphemism for kal v'chomer, the methodology of Talmudic exegesis. And Bilovenim becomes a euphemism for libun hilchata, being able to comb through the many, many disparate strands of thought and to be able to kind of harvest or bring to the fore the pragmatic application of Jewish law. This is all very labor intensive, it's all very difficult. And that the more we devote ourselves to avodat Hashem, to the spiritual service of God, then we refine ourselves that way, and that way we don't have to go through other hardships and difficulties which might refine our personality. Okay, so that's talked about in Torah. And Alter Rebbe says that this is what can position us. The toil is what positions us for future revelation. And that it has to be in a manner of avodat terech. It has to be crushing, backbreaking, like taking upon yourself difficult tasks of Torah study. And this means, the Rebbe said, it means that limud ha-Torah, that the study of Torah, has to be mitech yegia rabba. We have to study Torah with tremendous toil. This is important for us to hear because, we're living in a proverbial TikTok generation. Nobody has patience to stay focused for more than 5 minutes. And you have to be have little pictures exploding all over the place to keep it interesting. Otherwise, you can't even follow a train of thought. Guess what, guys? That's so off. It's actually a disaster. And we need to learn how to learn. And that's toil and labor intensive, and it's difficult. That's what it's all about. It's all about yegia. It's all about effort and toil and strenuous, devoted, committed study. The real deal. That's how one reaches greatness in Torah. That's how one becomes truly erudite. That's how you open your mind, and that's how you're able to reorient yourself. And the Rebbe said a very interesting thing at Reframing. The Rebbe said that we typically tend to think of yegia, the necessity for a great deal of toil, coming out of, let's call them side effects or things which are not really related to Torah itself. So a person can have difficulty focusing. Why? Why? Because he's distracted. How could he study Torah now when all this is going on in the world? Or he has problems, real issues. How is he supposed to be focused on Torah study when he has anxiety that's consuming him? But he forces himself and he toils. That's very nice, but that's not why we need to toil in Torah. Otherwise, just say, listen, Hashem, take away the anxiety, take away the problems, give me what we call a ruike cup, a relaxed mind, and I'll just focus on Torah study. And why can't it be that way? Why do things have to be difficult? Or do they? Do we actually believe in suffering as the path to redemption? By the way, we don't. So the Rebbe said also that another kind of contributing factor could be the particular nature of the subject matter, that it's very intricate, it's very deep, or maybe that we're not that bright, and our mental acuity is limited, and it's hard for us to grasp concepts that are beyond us. So the Rebbe said this is in fact not the truth. It's not the case. How do you know? The Rebbe shared something so beautiful. The Rebbe said there's a famous teaching of Rav Chaim Vital, who was a star pupil of the Arizal. And the Arizal, he said, merited greatness in Torah by the Arizal's own self-testimony because he toiled in Torah. That was his secret. The Arizal toiled in Torah until he was to the point of perspiration. It wasn't his inspiration, it was his perspiration. And he would have literally sweat pouring off his face from his toil in Torah. Imagine that. He would sweat over the topics that he was learning, that he was mastering. And the Rebbe said from this we can derive that yegia, that toil in Torah, is in a foundational essence of Torah. Why? Well, because the Arizal First of all, he was the most brilliant person. He had an unbelievably profound and wide-ranging mind. Just unbelievable. It's evident. The Arizal's genius is off the charts. He just knew everything. And with such creativity and such elegance and such profundity. So it's like an astounding human being. His mental gifts were like this, just absolutely astounding. So there wasn't a limitation from his mind. And the Arizal didn't have to make a living. He had a very wealthy father-in-law, and the Arizal wasn't even bothered. His wife was a very, very pious and devoted person, and she said to her husband, you study. That's what you need to do. That's your contribution. The Arizal was living like a houseboat on a river somewhere in Egypt, and he was like focused on his Torah study. He'd come home for Shabbat. He wasn't even dealing with helping with the kids. He wasn't. His wife sent him off. She said, you go study Torah. That's your contribution. And that's what I want you to focus on. He came home to his family for Shabbat. So why did the Arizal have to work so hard? What was bothering him? The answer is nothing. You're talking about a holy person, very saintly person, who's a genius, who has no issues on his radar that would serve in an obstruction for Torah study. So what is he overcoming? What's he toiling at? And the Rebbe says, from this you can understand that toil in Torah is not resultant of challenges, but that it is virtuous and meaningful in and of itself. And Reb Chaim Vital asked the Arizal, why is this the case? And he said to him, because Hashem created a world with an enormous amount of dark energy or extraneous reality. And our job is to be able to harvest or to extract the little tiny points of light from all these dark holes. And that's called the acts of refinement. Just like, this is just a lame metaphor, but we used it many times. You take the petroleum out of the ground, you can't use it in the machine unless you want to kill the machine because it's full of toxins. You have to refine it, you have to cleanse it. Gold ore doesn't come out of the ground shining like gold. It comes out looking black and ugly. And in fact, no precious metals come out that way. Even diamonds are in the rough. And they have to be refined. They have to be processed, and be developed. And the same is true with the food that we harvest. You want to chew on wheat? No, you want nice bread. So that's an act of refinement. And what comes into your body, in order for the food you ingest to actually become part of you, when it's a foreign substance being ingested, your body has a very sophisticated system called digestion that eventually and ultimately allows it to harvest that which the body can use in a non-harmful way and push out all the toxins. This is the concept of refinement. So the Arizal said that there's a lot of klipa. You have to break the klipa. And he said that the teikif, that the strength and the force, the chayzik of this klipa is such that the only way to break the klipa is through toil. And the Rebbe said, from this it is understood that b'mikol sheken v'kal v'chemer, how much more so when we speak about ordinary people like us, that in order for us to overcome the concept of klipa, which is not necessarily challenges, it's just extraneous matter, and to be able to harvest the light, we have to work with tremendous toil. So the Rebbe kind of, introduced the idea of Yegia and bathed it in a new light, a new concept of Yegia. And here's where the Reframing starts to get very interesting, and it dovetails into our issue, right? Our issue of yearning for Moshiach. So the Rebbe said there's another key element in the concept of Avodas Perach. There's a medrash. The medrash is found in the first chapter of Medrash Rabbah on Parshat Shemot. The Torah mentions Perach, Avodat Perach, twice in the Torah. And then the first time it's understood by most of the commentaries as literally crushing labor, backbreaking, crushing labor. But then the Medrash comes back and says, Eskol Avaidasim. Then in verse 14 it says, Eskol Avaidasim asher avdu behem befarach. All of the work which they did with this crushing harshness. It's like unbelievably difficult and crushing reality they were faced with. So the Medrash says, Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman Amar, Rabbi Yonason. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman said in the name of Rabbi Yonason, Melamed, this teaches us, Shahoyu machlifin meleches anoshim lenoshim, or meleches noshim laanoshim. It means that they were giving the work that was typically performed by females to males, and the work that was typically performed by males to females. Now, I don't want to talk about this, the whole political correctness of this, and whether you like this or not. I'm telling you what the Medrash says. I think it's very easy to understand this, and the reality is that women are better at some things, usually, and men are usually better at something. It doesn't mean sometimes there will be men who have effeminate characteristics and seem to be good at the things that women are usually good at. It doesn't mean sometimes you won't have women who are maybe better at masculine tasks, but broadly speaking, that's the way it is. And what does it mean? So the Eitz Yosef says, Kagon, for example, historically, Charisha, the labor-intensive plowing, especially the way they used to do it once upon a time, Zriya and planting, binyan and construction. So it's a masculine thing. Meleches Nashim was very, very labor-intensive. We didn't have washing machines once upon a time. Washing laundry was a very difficult thing. They would have to soak it in this putrid brine, and then they'd take it out of the solution, and they would bang it on a rock. They really would work very hard on this. So, and then there was, the kitchen is not exactly a relaxing place to be. Think Iron Chef, think pressure. So there was Afia, Bishul, and Tvia, and they used to spin to spin the thread and to weave. These are very difficult things. But it came especially difficult to them because they kind of, and by the way, this is a Medrash Tanchuma. It's not the HCS's idea, it's a Medrash Tanchuma. And in the beer of Yeruchim Perlov, he also cites, he says, Anashim Anashim, he says this is Afia, Bishul, Kvisa, he brings down the same things, and he says, this is brought in Medrash Tanchuma. And here an interesting thing happens. Amar Rabbi Avia says, Moide Rabbi Lazar agrees, Shahu befricha. Rabbi Lazar agrees that this time, that this is the meaning of the crushing, backbreaking nature, the emotionally crushing nature of this work. And why is that? So the Matnas Kuna, one of the commentaries on the Medrash, says, because the first time it says avodat perach, it says crushing labor. So there was crushing nature of the labor. That was the first time. Okay, that's literal. But what is Torah repeating itself again? And Rabbi Lezer actually has a different interpretation. He says it wasn't. He says perach means perach. Perach means soft-spoken. They introduced it. It was a ruse. They came to the Jews and they said, everybody's participating in this national building project, and you should participate also. And you're not going to participate? You're not going to be patriotic? And the Jews, no, of course, I'm doing what everybody else does. And everything began sweet, which is why, incidentally, the maror that we use is the romaine lettuce, which is a very bitter root. But the lettuce is sweet and tasty. It all starts sweet and tasty. Almost every time, historically, the Jewish people have been intensely persecuted. It started first with us being loved and embraced and assimilated, and then it didn't work in the end. And they was, oh, look at this. Everybody loves us. It doesn't matter that we're Jewish. We're not being hated anymore. Oh, and so where did that come from? I mean, think of Eastern Europe and Germany, Western Europe. Like Eastern Europe, there was open anti-Semitism. But in Western Europe and in Germany, Jews were emancipated and free and beloved until they weren't anymore. Anyway, this is not so hard to understand, and it's a tragic reality. So this is what he says. The first time is the perach is perach, but he says the second time, even Rabbi Lazar would agree that this means shivra in haguf. This is talking about the breaking of the body. And this is fascinating because what the Medrash is talking about is what we would call in today's modern terminology emotional abuse. And people didn't talk about this once upon a time. People talked about physical abuse, not emotional. It was emotional abuse. Putting people into situations or circumstances that were beyond their comfort zone. And that was called avodas perach. So the Rebbe said that then what we must do to succeed at Torah study is to force ourselves to go against our nature. And this sounds very strange, like, don't we as Torah Jews believe that the Torah is the heritage of every single Jew? Well, by the way, we do. That's the meaning of the pasuk, the verse, which the first verse, parents are supposed to be teaching their children. Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu, he commanded us the Torah, he taught us the Torah, and it was morosha, it's the heritage and inheritance of Keilat Yaakov, the congregation of Jacob. So what do you mean? Torah studies against our nature? Like what does that even mean? And the Rebbe said an incredible thing. The Torah study, in its perfected art form, the way Torah study should be, means that we have to transcend our nature. That's the meaning of Yegia B'Torah. Just like the Rebbe didn't say this at this Reframing, but he mentioned the story other times, that somebody once came to the third Rebbe in the Chabad Lubavitch dynasty, the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, and he said to the Tzemach Tzedek that I don't like to learn. I have a problem. I don't like to learn Torah. I'm not like academically oriented. And the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, said, that sounds like a solution to me. So he said, Rebbe, it's terrible. A Jew is supposed to learn Talmud Torah, Keneged Kulam. It's such an important part, an integral part of our spiritual pursuit, of our religious obligation. And here, I don't like it. And Tzemach Tzedek said to him that in order for it to be avodat Hashem, in order for it to be done out of subservience to Hashem, out of devotion and love to Hashem, and out of commitment, it has to go beyond what comes to one easily. And Tzemach Tzedek said, I love to learn Torah. I love to learn Torah. And for me, to study Torah more than what I love to do is very difficult. It has to be, it's not day and it's not night. And then the Rebbe finds a moment to push himself. But he says, you're right there. You don't have to look for it. In other words, Torah study requires toil. So the Rebbe said like this. The Rebbe said that Avodas Perech, if we understand the Medrash, we look at the Medrash, just like the way the Medrash speaks about that in other words, that the Egyptians designed the labor specifically. This is the third stage. There's 4 stages the Medrash talks about. The third stage was designed to break their spirit, to demoralize them. It was designed for demoralization. And they wanted to crush them. So they gave them things to do they were unaccustomed at doing, things they were not good at doing. And I'll give you an example. Like, everybody's good at certain things, or, adept or comfortable doing certain things, and you're really uncomfortable doing other things. And when you're forced into a position that you're not good at, especially if you're a perfectionist type A personality, and you're put into a position where you can't excel because it's not really what you know how to do well, it's very uncomfortable. And it can be demoralizing, it can be depressing. And the person says, I don't want to do this. I don't want to spend my life doing this. And we talk about toxic workplaces, and we talk about people who are in a vocation that they absolutely hate. They hate what they do. And it could be a terrible thing. It causes enormous stress. It literally can become a source of the opposite of life. Chas v'sholom. So this is a very difficult thing. So what does this mean then? Like, if you think about it, why would they do that? Why did the Egyptians want to demoralize them? It's like the Beis HaLevi. It explains that what he asked the question: weren't they interested in work? And they wanted to work. He said, wanted to work, they would have less productivity. And he says, no, they were more interested in destroying them at their own economic expense. The Egyptians would do what was counterproductive and what would ruin efficiency and economic value of the Jewish labor force, as long as they could demoralize the people. And what bothered them was the confidence that the Jews had, and their high-mindedness, and their belief that they were unique and special. They couldn't stand this. So they wanted to undermine that sense of Jewish pride. They wanted to destroy their faith and their connectivity and connection with one another. And that would hasten their assimilation, because it would just crush the people. And that's what they really wanted to destroy the Jewish people. That's what this was about. And our enemies who enslaved us were not different over the years. I heard from many a Holocaust survivor of how the Germans were more interested in demoralizing and killing them than getting them to do the work for them. Even in the work camps, and there were 60,000. Get that? You can Google it. It's real. 60,000 work camps. Some had like 10 inmates, but they were doing all kinds of things. And yet, to demoralize and kill the Jews, even if it meant them losing the war, which is actually what happened, was was worth it, so to speak. Why? Because of their maniacal and fanatical hatred of the Jewish people. They hated the Jews more than they loved themselves. As demented and twisted as that sounds. So that was the story. Okay, so what does this mean? How does this work in our day and age? Like, what's the good news? What's the good word? The good news. So the Rebbe says like this. The Rebbe says, the Alter Rebbe, in Perek Tezvav, in the 15th chapter of the first section of Tanya, Likutei Amorim, the Alter Rebbe speaks about the difference between the Oved Elikim. Who is the real servant of Hashem? Who is the real servant of Hashem? Alter Rebbe says some pretty incredible things over here. He says it says v'shavtem or isem. You take a look and you contemplate. Bein Oved Elikim la'shalei avadei. You'll see who really serves Hashem, who really is a servant, and really who isn't a servant. The Alter Rebbe speaks about this idea of going beyond the comfort zone. That's what he speaks about, and he says the Gemara in Masechet Chegig. It's a Gemara. The Gemara says that Oved Elikim. What's a Oved? It's a real servant of Hashem. The person. The Gemara in Chagiga says on Daf Tes, is the person who studies his lessons, reviews his lessons 101 times. And Lo Yavadeh, the person who doesn't serve Hashem, meaning he's not like an outstanding example, a paradigm of devotion and commitment, that's the guy who studies his lesson only 100 times. And of course the Gemara says, like, what's going on here? This doesn't seem to make sense. Like, one more time. And the Gemara says that the one more time is because one transcends regilus, the nature. Like, and there's an example that's brought of renting donkeys. So you rent, to go a certain distance a day, you would rent for 10 zuz. But if you wanted to go beyond that distance, even 1 extra mile, then all of a sudden the price changed. It's like these car rentals today where you're going to pay $30 a day and you get 100 miles a day. But if you go 101 miles or kilometers, everything changes. Then all of a sudden, it's instead of 30, it becomes $60 a day. It goes up twice. Why? Because you went beyond the limit. And this is all a metaphor. It's a metaphor. He says, Alter Rebbe says, "Be mayhem in the days of the Talmud was haragilus, was their nature. Lishna is kol perek me'apam. They learned everything 100 times. Like the shuk shel chabarim, like the rental, the donkey rental. Sheneskarim le'eser parsi bezuzah. They would go for 10 farsangs for a zuz. But if you wanted 11 farsangs, that was like a whole different story. But that would tell you the price doubles. Why? Shu yosem regilusam. It's like, overtime. Working when you're not supposed to be or don't want to be working. So this is the idea of transcending nature. And the Alter Rebbe goes on in this chapter of Tanya to speak about the great value and importance that's to be found in transcending nature. And the Rebbe says that this is precisely what's being referred to. We talk about the Avedas Perech, the toil and Torah. And the Rebbe says that there's an interesting, the Rebbe said it gets even more interesting, that the truth is that when we get used to going beyond what we're used to, then that breaks a glass ceiling. Then all of a sudden that becomes the new norm. It becomes a new norm. And in fact, it's uncomfortable not to do that anymore. That's all of a sudden you become used to that. And it's painful not to. You don't feel good about yourself not to. The Rebbe cites a fascinating Gemara, Masechet Bava Metzia. The Gemara talks about in Daf Ayin Zayin on page 77, the Gemara talks about the what happens if you hire workers. So you hire workers and the workers, the job you hired them for is not getting done by the workers because the job got done already. Either there wasn't merchandise or there wasn't a circumstance. You hired people and you don't have work for them. So what do you do now, right? So the Gemara says that you pay them, like for not doing anything, which is not the same as working. you compensate them, but you don't compensate them on the same level. Like workers' comp. Like if somebody's not working, you're not going to get your full salary. You're getting a portion of your salary. But then Rava comes back and he says that there's a certain dimension of work where after they finish their work, if there's no work left for them, the Gemara says that in that case, you have to pay them the full price. You have to pay them the full price. So the Gemara says, Amai, why do you have to give them their full salary? After all, they're not working. Let them be paid like a person who is being paid not to work. The workers' comp paradigm. And the Gemara answers, Kika Amar Rava, when did Rava say this? Ba'achlushe de Mechuzah. But the people, the porters of Mechuzah. Mechuzah was a very famous town where Rava lived in Babylon. So in these porters were used to heavy work. And the Eloi Avdei, and if they wouldn't do work, Chalshid, that would weaken them. Their constitutions was such that they loved to work. They felt good about working. And they didn't feel good about lazing around. The bohemian lifestyle was not for them. It's like, I will give you a simple example. It's not so hard to understand. In today's day and age, we have people who like to work out. And they feel good at their workout. They get out their machines and they work hard and they're sweating and they feel great. And when they can't work out, when they're not able to exercise, they feel lousy. So these people, these workers are actually being robbed of work. They want to work. They feel good about their work. And it's interesting that the Rosh says, and this is brought in Shulchan Aruch, it's brought in Chesh Mishpat and Shin Lamed Dalet, the Rosh says that this is not only about menial or physical labor. The same applies also to the idea of white-collar labor. And he talks about specifically a teacher. And he says a teacher who got used to teaching, who developed a love for teaching, then feels robbed of that opportunity. They need to teach. That makes them feel good. I personally relate to this. I understand, like even sometimes when I'm down, teaching Torah brings me up. It's a wonderful thing. You learn to love it. So the Rebbe said that becomes a new nature. It becomes a new nature. And on the contrary, not only it's not taxing, it's exhilarating, it's uplifting. So the Rebbe said, what happens then? Where's the Avodas Perach then? Where's the toil? Where's the toil if the toil is no longer transcendent of nature? And the Rebbe goes on to say that on the contrary, it shouldn't be surprising because really and truly, that is our nature. The Rebbe cites a famous example of when a person is coerced to do a Yiddishkeit thing that requires desire, that requires willful participation. And the person is being forced by the court of Jewish law, but how can that work? There's no willful participation. And the answer is, there is willful participation. So why did the person saying he didn't want it until you forced him or coerced him? And the answer is, because his Yetzer Hara, his evil inclination, got the better of him. But once you get past the Yetzer Hara, once you weaken the evil inclination, the selfishness, and the capriciousness, and the meanness, once you get past that, then the true nature comes out. So that's really our true nature. Our true nature is to revel in Torah, to love Torah, to enjoy Torah. That's really who we are. Okay, so if that's who we are, where's the Avodas Perach? Where's the transcendence of nature? And the Rebbe says an incredible thing. The Rebbe says, when a Yid finds himself in Galut, it's in Galut. So in our present reality, even when you're toiling and you're going beyond your natural inclination, to the point that it becomes second nature, or it becomes your truest nature, like a person who loves music, who practices his singing or playing on his or her instrument for hours and hours and hours and doesn't feel tired by it, loves doing it. It's a labor of love. The artist who paints, who draws, he loves what he's doing. He loves it. So the Rebbe said that when we have to leave our pursuit of the thing we love, the Torah study. Why? Because there's issues to deal with. It's like you have to do your work to make a living. You have to deal with menial things. Just the reality is that life presents. Like there's things that take up time, that take you away from your passion, take you away from your hobby and your love, the thing you love, your pursuit of the thing you love. So the Rebbe says that when a Yid is yearning to study Torah, but he can study Torah, he's got to go make a living, he's got to go deal with stuff. He's going to the DMV to renew his license. I don't know, whatever, the things that have to be done. So what happens is that there's a sense of frustration. And you're yearning to be freed, like, leave me alone with this crazy stuff. Let me focus on what I really want to do. The Rebbe said, that becomes the Avedis Perach. That becomes the yearning. That becomes the difficulty. And because we're studying Torah with such intensity, because of our passion for Yiddishkeit, it's the everyday things that get in the way and they frustrate us. And that frustration makes us want Mashiach, because we want to do the things we want to do. Why are we having to deal with all these extraneous things? And the Rebbe cites the words of the Rambam, both in Hilchos Tshuva in the 9th chapter, Halacha Beis, but this is also found in the Laws of Kings. He speaks about the world where Mashiach will come, that we'll be freed of all the things that take up our time that we don't want to be busy with. All the things that we're stuck doing. The Rebbe says, when Mashiach will come, we'll be freed of all these chores, of all these things that divert us from our labor of love, the thing that we want to do. And he says, it was in order to be freed up from these things. That's why we yearn for Mashiach. He says, Kol Yisrael. This is why people had such an intense desire. Nevi'eim v'chachamim, the prophets and the wise people. That's why they wanted Yemesa Mashiach. That's why they want it. Why did they want it? He says they want it kedei sheyanuchu mimalchus harisha, that they would be no longer interrupted from the spiritual pursuit. They wouldn't be in any way impeded by the evils of government. And unfortunately, we can understand that. You have rules and regulations which oftentimes disable and stop a person from being able to fulfill their spiritual destiny. They're not able to self-actualize. They're not able to fulfill their potential. They're not able to do the things they love doing. And when Mashiach will come, then we're going to have a Yim Sulahem, and the days of Mashiach have Margoya, have peace, and just serenity. And you're going to be able to focus on the things you want to focus on. That's why they wanted Mashiach. And but what about the idea that Kol Ma'asecha Yil L'Shem Shamayim, that everything you do should be for the sake of heaven? And what about B'chol Derochecha? King Solomon says in his wisdom, in all of your ways you know him. The Rebbe says, okay, you can utilize all the material and ordinary, mundane, pedestrian things in order to reach a higher level of closeness to God, but that's a hechsher mitzvah. It's just like a bridge to what you want to get. Why can't I do the things I really want to do? Think about the person who wants to spend time with the person they love, with their children, with their spouse, and they're not able to. And they're not happy about it. They just wish they could be left alone. Think about a person who has a passion, a hobby, and wants to do it. And they wish they could do it. Then they hope for retirement. They say, I want to retire. I want to spend the time doing things I want to do. That's what we're talking about here. And the Rebbe says this is why the prophet says, like, you won't have to be involved in the menial things. Strangers will come and do your work. So for many years, like we imagine this would be, that there will be people who can't study Torah and do art. And they would say, go study Torah, go do your spiritual pursuit. Now it could simply mean robots. AI is going to take over. They're already talking about AI taking over all the menial tasks. You won't have to do menial tasks anymore. You need a flyer design? Just give it to AI. You need something written? Give it to AI. Who needs to work on these things? Well, what can't AI do? AI can't pray. AI can't study Torah. That's where we'll be able to spend our pursuit. Mashiach will come. There'll be a whole cadre of robots doing all this for us. Not only will it clean the dishes, it'll load the dishwasher for you. Not only will it wash your clothes like the washing machine, it'll load the washing machine and fold the clothes for you, so to speak. You won't have these menial chores anymore. It'll print your breakfast. You won't have to make breakfast. Everything will just be available. And the Rebbe says that this is why we should want Mashiach. This is why a Yid screams out to the Eibishter, Ad Masai, how much longer do I have to be bothered and impeded by all these other things that I don't really want to do? I want to spend my life in pursuit of divinity, of spirituality, of higher consciousness, the things that really light and ignite my neshama. And as long as I'm so busy with all these other things, which take up so much time, so much effort, that only get in the way, it gives me a profound sense of frustration to the point that I want all this stuff to go away, and I want Mashiach to come. And the truth is, it's so elegant and so novel, but really, if you think about it carefully, it's exactly what the Rambam just said, like exactly what the Rambam says in Halacha Tes, in Halacha Beis, the second Halacha of Mipnei Zeh. That's why hisavu. What does hisavu mean? Hisavu means they lusted, they craved, they yearned, they wanted. It's a whole new way of looking at it. It's not about suffering. It's not about sadness. It's not about difficulty, trial, or travail. It's about being in love with God and Torah mitzvahs. It's about in love with spirituality. It's about transcending the glass ceilings and self-actualizing and finding the truest fulfillment and the truest happiness by living the kind of life that Hashem ordained us to live and being frustrated by the things that get in the way of that. And that is the best of reasons for us to say, Genug shein, enough of these challenges and issues. When can I finally be free to do what I want to do the things I love to do, and to achieve the fullest sense of self-actualization and development of my own potential in the most wondrous of ways. This is the potential that belongs to each and every one of us. We are each given an enormous capacity for holiness, for spirituality, for closeness to God. And the lack of being able to achieve it is the reason for us to say, we want Mashiach now. May we have the right ideas. May we not have to suffer. May there not have to be the difficulty, trial, the travail that has so often come to characterize our exilic experience. May we, out of Avodat Hashem, experience the yearning to want it, and as a result of our wanting, to merit the coming of Mashiach now, B'Meira U'B'Yameinu. Amen. Thank you so much for joining. Have a beautiful evening. If you found this uplifting, educational, or inspirational, please be so kind as to share this with your family and friends. And if you aren't yet, please subscribe and enable notifications. I look forward to seeing you back. Laila Tov.